My daughter forgot to end the call. I overheard her mother-in-law say, "Hope she's not coming to the wedding. No chair for people shaped like a fridge." She answered, "True, MOM could eat for three. Your wish is my command." I silently disconnected. Then I made 3 phone calls. That wedding never happened. Can you even imagine? 1 minute, I'm stirring shrimp and grits for my daughter's wedding reception, happy and excited. The next, I overhear her fiancé's mother, and then my own daughter, laughing as they call me a fridge and declare there's no seat for people built like that. That laugh, that casual cruelty shattered everything. My heart didn't just break, it hardened. And right then, in that moment, I knew this wedding was never going to happen. What time are you watching this? Morning coffee? Late at night, when the house is quiet? Why? Either way, stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you isn't some movie plot. This is my life, my voice, my body that they thought was just space to joke about. Some of you might swear I went too far. Some will say I should have been louder, faster, colder. But I need you to listen as if it's happening right in front of you, because it did. I was in my kitchen that afternoon, doing what mothers do, fussing, stirring shrimp and grits for a tasting. My daughter, Mary's caterer, God bless her, didn't know seasoning from dust. And though I promised myself not to meddle, old habits pull you back. My phone lit up with Mary's name, and I answered. I heard a clatter, her voice far away, "Hold on, Ma." Then silence, but the line didn't end. That's when I heard it, a woman's voice, his mother's, sweet and sharp, like honey poured over a blade. "I hope she's not coming to the wedding. There's no seat for people built like a fridge." The spoon in my hand stopped midair. I swear, the whole room hollowed. My only daughter's voice came next, and it wasn't her voice, not the child I carried through 4 surgeries, not the girl who once argued a teacher into letting her science project sit on the main table. It was smaller, a borrowed voice, a voice that wanted to be approved. True, she could eat for 3. A pause. "Your wish is my command." I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't gasp or cry. I pressed mute, set it gently on the counter, and watched butter slide across the skillet like time was mocking me. People built like a fridge. Do you know what that does to a woman who carried whole decades on her hips, who scrubbed floors in a crawl space, worked 2-night shifts in DC, and passed her RN boards at 36 when everyone thought she was too tired, too old, too heavy? I stood still in that kitchen, watching steam rise, and thought, asterisk, so this is what betrayal sounds like. Light-hearted, laughing, obedient. Asterisk, let me back up just a little so you understand why those words didn't just bruise. They split something open. I've lived 2 marriages, 2 lives almost. My first husband was a man who knew how to strangle dreams by calling them impractical. He didn't want me in classrooms, didn't want me climbing ladders, didn't want me big in any sense except the one that made me easy to manage. I left him with nothing but a child on the way and a promise to myself. I would not shrink so someone else could feel tall. Years later, after I fought for my nursing degree, worked as a wound care nurse, then as a manager, I took a chance on a startup that got acquired. With that, and a second husband who believed in me until the day he died, I started buying property on the Georgia coast. My house on Sapelo Sound became more than a house. It was proof that a woman can build something unshakable, proof that grief doesn't get the final word. That house was supposed to hold Mary's wedding. I paid the deposits, signed the contracts, wrote the checks for food, flowers, music, even the dress she wanted so badly. My money had built the day. My love had built the dream. And still, built like a fridge. When you hear something like that, you don't just hear it once. It echoes. It echoes in the dressing rooms where saleswomen tugged at my arms like they were measuring meat. It echoes in the jokes men made when they wanted me grateful. It echoes every time I told my daughter, stand tall, don't apologize for your space. And now here she was laughing at my expense, keeping her place with a man and a mother who needed me smaller. I wiped my hands, walked into my study, and sat at the oak desk that has carried every major decision of my life. 3 photographs stared back at me. Mary at 7, gap-toothed, and furious because her teacher tried to erase her project. Me in the black suit I wore when I got promoted to nurse manager. And my second husband, whose eyes smiled more than his mouth. I opened my leather notebook and wrote one line. The wedding never happened. That wasn't grief speaking. That wasn't anger either. It was clarity. The kind that doesn't come often, but when it does, it lands heavy. Some people think revenge is fire and screaming. For me, it's ink on a page. Contracts, clauses, signatures. Quiet but final. I closed the notebook, took one deep breath, and felt my pulse steady. Because once I write it down, it's law. And I already knew the next step. I made 3 calls. People always imagine revenge as something loud. Doors slammed, voices raised, plates shattered against the wall. But the truth is quieter than that. My kind of revenge doesn't need volume. It needs precision. A ledger, not an explosion. Ink, not blood. The skillet was still warm when I reached for my phone again. Not to listen, not to confront, but to execute. The wedding was already dead. It just didn't know it yet. Call 1. I dialed Nia, the events director. Most people knew her as Carla, but I called her by the name she asked me to. Nia, the one she'd buried for corporate comfort. She always answered my calls on the first ring. Mrs. Andrews, she said, her voice steady, practiced. I'm invoking the sponsor consent clause. I told her. My tone left no room for negotiation. All vendor deliverables halt at noon. Billing is suspended until I redirect. No external statement yet. There was the faintest pause, not of resistance, of recognition. Nia knew the kind of woman I was. She knew I didn't raise my voice unless the house was already on fire. Copy of the signed contract is in your inbox. She said, I'll enforce immediately. Do you want a hard stop notice sent to the catering team today? Yes. And hold the rentals and storage until I tell you otherwise. Her pen must have been moving fast. I could hear the scratch of it even through the line. Understood. Noon cut off. No further obligations without your written consent. Good, I said. Thank you, Nia. That call took 3 minutes. 3 minutes to undo 6 months of planning. Paper moves faster than apologies. Call 2. I didn't hesitate before dialing Mr. Baines, my lawyer. A gray man. Exacting. The kind of lawyer who preferred documents over eye contact. Mrs. Andrews. He greeted, his clipped tone the same as always. I need rescissions prepared. I told him. Every gift not yet delivered. Every pending transfer frozen. Every beneficiary designation not filed. Revoked. Draft the notices now. Send me the list for confirmation. Include vendor sponsorships. Everything with my name attached. I said, my voice steady. And update my living trust to reflect new terms. Effective immediately. There was a long breath on the other end. Not judgment, just acknowledgement of weight. Understood. I'll text you the inventory within the hour. I thought about the checks I'd written, the deposits I'd made for florals, musicians, dresses, even favors. I thought about how much silence those checks had purchased from me. Silence that ended today. Call 3. The last was to the insurer. People think insurance is about death, but it's really about trust. Who you believe won't starve you while you're still breathing. I'd named Mary as primary years ago when my own mother died, and I learned how ugly funerals could get when money was involved. But I couldn't leave that weight with someone who laughed at my body to stay in good standing with people who despised me. The representative's voice was young, polite. I'll need to verify your identity, Mrs. Andrews. Ask me anything, I said. She did. Birth city, high school mascot, first pet. I answered each one without flinching. A turtle, I said, named Papy. When the last verification cleared, I gave the new name. Primary beneficiary is now my sister, Adon, effective immediately. The representative read it back, her tone neutral. For her, it was paperwork. For me, it was a transfer of power. By the time I hung up, the kitchen had gone quiet. The shrimp and grits sat cooling on the stove, butter hardened along the edges of the pan. I didn't even feel hungry anymore. Miss Franny stepped in from the porch, her hands smelling of hydrangeas, her apron damp from watering. She looked at me, eyes sharp as always. What storm you swallowed this time, baby? I shook my head. No storm, just business. She studied me for a beat, then nodded. You tell me what to carry. Without a word, she started packing up the tasting dishes, moving gently, respectfully, as if she knew not to ask questions yet. That's the kind of loyalty you don't buy, the kind you earn by surviving side by side for decades. While she worked, I gathered the signed papers that had already landed in my inbox, scanned through Mr. Bain's draft notices, and checked the insurance confirmation number one more time. 3 calls, 3 locks turned. The wedding might still exist in their group chats, in their Pinterest boards, in the fantasy his mother curated for the church ladies and society pages. But on paper, the only place that mattered, it was gone. Revenge for me isn't about fire. It's about ledger lines, about making sure that if you dismiss me, the structure you're standing on disappears with my withdrawal. I don't throw tantrums. I turn off faucets. By noon, vendors who had once depended on me for deposits were receiving polite final notices. By 2, Bain's letters had begun circling in inboxes like vultures, legal teeth gleaming. By 3, Mary no longer held a place in the policy that once guaranteed her safety. She didn't know it yet. None of them did. But the foundation beneath their perfect optics had shifted. Paper moves faster than apologies. People look at a 30-year-old woman in a silk engagement gown and forget the years it took to raise her spine. They forget the bruises of childhood, the quiet lessons folded into late-night talks, the places where laughter covered hunger or cruelty. I don't forget. I can't, because every piece of me the world sees I had a hand in shaping. I'm not saying I raised her perfectly. No mother can. But I know what I put into her. I remember the science fair, 6th grade. She had built a model of tidal currents, careful as a surgeon, patient as her namesake, Miriam, who once parted seas with Faith alone. She'd stayed up 3 nights cutting cardboard, gluing sand, pulling thread through blue construction paper to show how water moved. But when the judges came around, they gave the ribbon to a boy whose father had clearly built his volcano for him. When they posted the results, Mary's shoulders slumped so hard her braids nearly touched the table. "Baby, what do you see?" I asked. She whispered that I lost. "No," I said, kneeling down, eye level. "You see injustice. Don't ever confuse the two. You can confront injustice, but you never concede to it." That afternoon, we went home, and I showed her how to write a letter. Not a rant, not tears on a page, but a firm account of what she'd built, what she'd learned, and how adults had failed to honor that. We mailed it to the school board. They never replied, but that wasn't the point. The point was that Mary learned silence was not her portion. Years later, in high school, We had those porch talks that mothers and daughters either cherish or survive. The Georgia heat thick around us, cicadas screaming from the trees. Mary asked me once if we were cursed because she'd heard her grandmother whisper about family curses and hushed tones about men leaving, women breaking. I told her, we don't carry curses, baby. We carry habits, generational habits. Some good, some rotten. And it's our job to know which is which. She nodded, biting her lip the way she did when she was storing a truth for later. I knew she was thinking about my first marriage, then about her stepfather's subtler cruelties. The way he'd sigh when I served dinner, as though food prepared by my hands was an inconvenience. The way he'd stand too long in doorways, so I'd have to shift sideways, shrinking myself to pass. The way he never hit, never cursed, but hollowed a woman out with indifference until silence grew inside her like mold. Mary and I survived that together. She saw me rebuild after the divorce, saw me turn night shifts as a nurse into a manager's badge, saw me take classes on weekends until I held a master's degree. She watched me pour sweat into a startup clinic when banks wouldn't lend, when credit unions asked for collateral I didn't have. She knew I made her a world that her stepfather once told me I'd never see. So, how could it be that the same girl now rehearsed optics with me, that she sat across from me in my own beach house kitchen, telling me that maybe for the sake of appearances, I could stand a little further back, speak a little softer, eat a little less. It was in the small corrections, the careful phrases. Mama, you don't have to sit at the front table. It's about optics. Or, Mama, maybe don't wear that red dress. It's kind of loud for the pictures. Optics, not honesty, not strength. Optics, and I knew where she'd gotten that language from. Him, the groom, with his jokes always played for a laugh that took a chunk out of her. Mary could eat for 3, he'd say at brunch, nudging her as though humor softened cruelty. Or, don't worry, she'll manage the bills. She grew up watching her mama pinch pennies. People laughed, but I saw how Mary's face tightened, how she filed the insult inside her rib cage and smiled to keep the peace. I'd raised a fighter, but I'd also raised a daughter who wanted peace more than breath. And sometimes that longing makes you bargain away the very parts of yourself that should never be for sale. Looking back now, I see it clear. I see how I should have known. I should have heard the question mark in her no. The first dinner with his family wasn't a dinner. It was a performance. I knew at the moment I stepped into their dining room, with its oil portraits staring down from paneled walls, the kind of wood that had held secrets for generations. The table stretched longer than some porches I'd sat on, polished so fine you could see your reflection in the gloss. Crystal gleamed, silverware aligned like soldiers. This wasn't about breaking bread. This was about establishing territory. His mother, Evangeline, though everyone around her called her Mrs. Vaughn as if the title were as permanent as stone, welcomed me with a smile so sweet it could rot your teeth. Lela, darling, you've worked so hard on the wedding already. You must let us handle the next stretch. It's tradition, you know, the family steps in at this stage. Tradition. I'd heard that word my whole life, usually wielded like a paddle. It meant, sit down, hush up, don't question. Tradition wasn't meant to honor people like me. It was meant to keep us in our place. Mary sat beside me, a tense smile plastered across her face. Every time Mrs. Vaughn spoke, she nodded so quickly, I worried her neck might snap. I knew that look. It was the same look I wore during my first marriage when silence was easier than confrontation. The groom, Daniel, chimed in sparingly. His power wasn't loud. It was logistical. Mama's right, he said between bites of lamb. It'll be smoother if we take over the last few details. Less stress on you, babe. Think about the optics. You don't want to seem overextended. That word again. Optics. The poison that disguised itself as care. I looked around the table at the siblings and cousins, all nodding in unison as if they'd practiced this choreography since birth. They weren't talking about details. They were talking about brand management. Their brand. Their legacy. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a press release with flowers. They asked me questions, all honey-dipped, but sharp at the core. What line of nursing are you in again? One cousin inquired, though I knew she'd read the feature article when our wound care startup launched. It's so inspiring how you ladies build these clinics. But, of course, keeping up appearances must be quite the task. Appearances, optics, tradition. Their vocabulary was a cage lined with velvet. Then came the power play. Mrs. Vaughn leaned across the table, rings catching the chandelier light. We've always believed philanthropy is the best way to demonstrate gratitude. I'm sure you understand, given your contributions. The beach house is such a blessing, a perfect venue. Everyone's been raving. The subtext wasn't lost on me. They liked me better as a check than as a mother. The more I bankrolled, the more respectable I became in their eyes. They respected land, yes, but only when it was old land wrapped in family names etched onto courthouse plaques. My real estate, too new. My clinic equity, too ambitious. My nursing degree, serviceable but pedestrian. What they respected about me wasn't me. It was my money. I felt the air thicken around me until my skin itched. I glanced at Mary, waiting for her to push back, to remind them that this was her wedding, not a Vaughn press conference. But she stayed still, eyes darting to Daniel for cues. Every time his mother spoke, Mary's lips curved into quick agreement, like a reflex she couldn't control. That's when I noticed Ezra. His role was quiet, somewhere between best man and younger brother. He didn't smile as much as the others did, not on cue. Instead, he studied Mary, watching the way she folded into herself when Mrs. Vaughn made a suggestion. His jaw tightened once, just slightly, when Daniel brushed off Mary's question about the music selections. Later, while coats were being collected and goodbyes exchanged, Ezra stepped closer to me. He spoke low, his tone different from the honeyed chorus I'd endured all night. "If you ever need someone to carry boxes at the beach house," he said, slipping a plain business card into my hand, "call me." I didn't look at the card right away, just felt the weight of it, the quiet rebellion tucked inside a simple gesture. He wasn't offering alliance. He was offering acknowledgement. Someone else in that house saw the performance for what it was. When I finally glanced at the card, it was spare. His name, his number, nothing else. A lifeline disguised as stationery. I left that house with a smile as brittle as porcelain, my daughter's hand tucked nervously into mine. But my mind was already turning pages in the leather notebook waiting on my desk. Rules can be rewritten. They like you better as a check than as a mother. People think money talks. They're wrong. Money doesn't talk. It writes. And if you're careful enough, it writes in ink that doesn't fade. That's why years ago, when I first put capital into my friend's wound care startup, I insisted on clauses that weren't glamorous but were airtight. I wasn't trying to be clever. I was trying to be safe. Safety in my world meant never having to beg someone to respect what I built. The sponsor consent clause was one of those lines. At the time, it felt like a formality, language tucked deep in the contract that said, no vendor, no caterer, no florist, no planner could deliver a service without the written consent of the sponsor. And in this wedding, I wasn't just the mother of the bride. I was the sponsor. My money had touched every seam, every flower order, every polished rental chair. That meant my signature was the gate, and I had just turned the key the other way. Nia was the first to act. By noon, she had a stack of emails drafted, polite but firm. Per the terms of the sponsor consent clause, all pending deliverables are hereby suspended until further notice. Billing is to be paused. Communication external to this office is prohibited without express approval. The florist called her within minutes, voice frazzled but relieved. I was drowning in adjustments, she admitted. If this means I can stop chasing Mrs. Vaughn's edits, I'll breathe again. She didn't say it outright, but I heard what she meant. We've already started sugar flowers. Another protested, you can't just stop the process now. Nia sent her the scanned clause, my signature in blue ink at the bottom. The contract allows it, she explained, tone clipped but professional. The silence on the line stretched, then snapped. The baker backed down. For every protest, there was proof. For every argument, a clause. It wasn't loud revenge. It was ledger revenge. Paper moving faster than apologies. While Nia handled the vendors, I turned back to the path that had put me here. The capital that birthed this clause wasn't luck. It was risk. My second husband, God rest his soul, left me more than love. He left me faith. He worked cranes at the port, calloused hands guiding steel across night skies, humming gospel under his breath. He believed I could take the little we had and make more out of it. So when the opportunity came to buy equity in a wound care startup, I wrote the check. Not for glamour, not for optics, for safety. That equity became acquisition. Acquisition became quiet capital, not loud money, with marble foyers and engraved stationery, but precise money, contracts, clauses, real estate that appreciated with the tide, money that could sit still until the right moment, then strike like a scalpel. Now it was doing what it was designed to do. Protect me, protect Mary, even if she couldn't see it yet. By late afternoon, Nia had sent the last of the notices. We drafted a joint message, stripped of drama, but firm in tone. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the ceremony is postponed until further notice. All parties will be updated when appropriate. No names, no blame, just enough to stem gossip before it boiled over. When the final email was queued, I shut my laptop. The silence that followed was deafening. Not the silence of neglect, but the silence after a storm passes, and you realize the ground has shifted beneath you. I allowed myself one moment, just one. I went upstairs to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed with my leather notebook open. The words blurred as tears welled, hot and steady. Not sobs, not a collapse, just a clean, pointed cry. Grief in its purest form. Grief for what I had hoped this moment in our lives would be. A wedding, a gathering, a celebration. But the moment passed. I dried my face, closed the notebook, and locked the grief down again. Because grief is private. Power, though, that is public. And I had just shifted the balance of power without raising my voice. When I came downstairs, Miss Franny looked up from the kitchen table where she was folding linen napkins. She didn't ask why my eyes were red. She just handed me a glass of water and said softly, "Done?" "Yes," I replied. "For now." She nodded, as if she'd expected that answer all along. Postponed is not canceled yet. The first ping came while I was still rinsing dishes. My phone lit up like a flare. Group chats unraveling. Emojis mixed with frantic texts. Bridesmaids and cousins panicking about postponement notices. By the third ping, I knew Mary had seen them, too. And by the fifth, her name flashed across my screen. I let it ring twice before answering, not because I didn't want to hear her voice, but because I needed my own to be steady. "Mom, what did you do?" Her tone wasn't soft. It wasn't the daughter I used to coach through math homework or calm after a breakup. It was clipped, high-strung, a tone I recognized from Mrs. Vaughn. An imitation she probably didn't even realize she was practicing. I exercised my rights as the sponsor. I said evenly, the vendors have been notified. Nothing more. Nothing less. You can't just— She stopped. I could hear voices in the background. A muffled laugh. A woman's register, deliberate and smooth. The mother-in-law. Mom, they're all saying, you embarrassed me. Do you know what this looks like? There it was. Optics again. Always optics. Mary, I said, lowering my own voice. Are you on speaker? Silence stretched. Too long to be innocent. I won't argue in a room where she's listening. I said, finally, if you want to talk to me, it will be you and me. No audience. No chorus. Her breath caught, then sharper. You're making this harder than it has to be. I gripped the countertop with one hand, knuckles whitening. I will not sponsor a ceremony where my body is the seat you won't assign. I told her. My words came out steady, but inside they trembled with years of swallowed dignity. You let them laugh at me, Mary, not strangers. Your future husband, your future family, and you laughed with them. That's not optics. That's harm. She said nothing, just shallow breathing on the other end, as though she couldn't decide if she was supposed to defend herself or defend them. And maybe that was the choice she'd been making in pieces, ever since she said yes to that man. Finally, a sharp click. Call ended. I stood in the kitchen with the phone pressed to my chest, listening to the absence of her voice. The silence was heavier than any insult. Miss Franny peeked in from the porch, drying her hands on her apron. She didn't ask what was said. She knew silence when she heard it. I wanted to crumble, but instead I went to my desk, opened the leather notebook, and wrote down her words. Not to shame her, not to weaponize them, but to keep a record, because words fade fastest when they're the ones that wound you. And I wasn't going to let these dissolve. Not 5 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. A text. Ezra, just checking in. Hope today isn't too heavy. If you need a hand moving boxes or fielding vendors, let me know. It was neutral, almost bland, like he'd written it with one eye over his shoulder. But the simplicity struck me harder than I expected. A man from that house, even distantly, acknowledging the weight without asking me to shrink under it. I didn't reply. Couldn't. Because any answer, thanks, maybe even silence with dots typing, might spiral into something I wasn't ready to hold. Instead, I set the phone face down. The sound of the ocean through the cracked window filled the room, steady and indifferent. The tide always came back, whether people honored it or not. That night, lying in bed, I thought of Mary as a little girl at her science fair. She'd built that project on renewable energy, cardboard solar panels that lit a tiny bulb. She didn't win, not because her work wasn't good, but because another student's father chaired the committee. I remembered kneeling beside her afterward, telling her not to concede to unfairness, not to shrink for the comfort of others. Now here we were years later, and I was watching her concede to jokes, to optics, to tradition. And for the first time, I realized the lesson hadn't stuck. Maybe because she'd seen me concede once, too. Back when I stayed, she'd inherited both sides of me, the fighter and the quiet sufferer. And in this moment, I didn't know which one would win. But I knew one thing: they would try to fix me instead of fixing the harm. And I was no longer a woman who could be fixed. It's strange the way discovery doesn't always arrive as lightning. Sometimes it's just a drip you've been ignoring until the floor gives way beneath your feet. Looking back, the signs had been tapping at me for months. Mary used to be a storyteller. She'd call me about a patient she met during her residency rotation, or a recipe she tried that turned into a disaster, or the funny thing a cab driver said on the way home. She had that childlike lilt in her voice, the one that made everything sound like it could turn into an adventure. But somewhere between the engagement dinner and the save-the-date cards, Her stories thinned out. Calls became shorter. Fittings happened without me. When I asked how it went, she'd give me the two-word version. It's fine. It wasn't fine. I should have paid attention when she let his mother dictate the guest list. Whole rows of my life erased with a single wave of optics. My church sisters, the ones who carried us through the lean years, didn't make the cut. The cousins who came every summer to eat watermelon on my porch were labeled too country. I swallowed it, telling myself that it wasn't worth a fight. I thought I was choosing peace. What I didn't realize was that every concession was a brick in a wall that kept me out. And then there were his jokes. He thought himself charming, quick with a smile, and quicker with sarcasm. The first time he laughed about my dress size. "You've got hips for days," he'd said, his arm around Mary. "Must run in the family." He brushed it off with a wink, like I was supposed to take it as flattery. Mary smiled nervously, the way a woman does when she knows disagreeing will cost her something invisible. The second time, it was at a barbecue. He made a crack about me needing an extra folding chair. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because silence would have been too heavy, but inside I felt something die. He always ended with "all in love," as if cruelty could be baptized by those 3 words. That afternoon, while I was replaying those moments in my mind, an email from Bain slid into my inbox. Subject line, "Rescinded gift list. Please confirm." I opened the attachment, scrolling through each item with deliberate calm. The wedding contributions, the transfers, the promised securities, line after line of generosity, now redirected back to me. I took out my pen and signed every page. Each stroke of ink felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I was losing. By the last signature, my hand ached, but my heart felt steadier than it had in weeks. Minutes later, the phone rang. It was the insurance company, completing their process for verification purposes. "Miss Grant," the representative said, "please confirm that you are changing your primary beneficiary from Miriam Vaughn to Adonse, effective today." "Yes," I said. "Please state your full name for the recording." I spoke slowly, my voice low but unwavering. "Lella May Grant." When the call ended, I sat in my chair for a long time, listening to the echo of my own words in my head. That steady voice, that was the sound of a door closing, not with anger, not even with grief, just finality. Miss Franny came in carrying a basket of laundry and glanced at me. "That storm still sitting on you?" she asked softly. "No," I said, folding my hands over the papers on my desk. "The storm's passed. This is the quiet after." She didn't push, just nodded and went about her business. But inside, I knew I was standing at a threshold. For years, I thought love would be tested by sacrifice, that the measure of devotion was how much you could endure. But this was a different kind of test. Not how much I could give up, but how much I could protect. How much of myself I was willing to guard, even if it meant guarding it from my own child. The discovery wasn't just that my daughter had laughed at me. The deeper truth was that I'd trained her, unknowingly, to think that kind of laughter was survivable. She had watched me bend again and again until she thought bending was the only way to keep love. But now the bending stopped. I looked out at the water, silver in the late afternoon light. The tide was shifting again, slow and certain. Now we test who is here for love and who is here for the view. A key tells you who belongs. Sapelo Sound isn't just an address. It's marrow in my bones. The first time I saw the property, the live oaks bent low like they were bowing to a secret. Spanish moss drifted down, like whispers too heavy to carry. The porch stretched wide, the kind of porch that seemed to invite people to sit down and tell truths they wouldn't dare speak indoors. I knew then that this was no ordinary house. This was a witness. I rebuilt this place twice. The The first time was from rot. Years of salt air had chewed into its beams. Rain had worn grooves into the flooring. I brought in crews and oversaw every nail, every plank, not because I couldn't hire someone to do it all, but because I wanted to understand the bones. If I was going to tie my life to this house, I needed to know what held it upright. The second time, I rebuilt it from grief. My late husband, Rafford, was a port crane electrician. Nights spent high above the Savannah River, his hands gripping steel, his eyes on cargo that never stopped moving. He was a man of quiet faith, hummed low gospel songs like they were prayers meant only for God's ear. He loved me because I was restless, because I looked at risk like a challenge instead of a warning. And when he died, the silence in this house was so thick, I thought it might choke me. I painted walls. I sanded floors. I filled the kitchen with smells that would have made him smile. Red beans simmering, cornbread baking. I lit candles, not because they could drive out grief, but because they reminded me I was still here, still burning. That's when this house became more than a structure. It became proof that I could lose everything and still rise. So, when the storm of this wedding betrayal began to rage, Sapelo Sound was the only place that made sense to anchor myself. The first call I made that morning was to the gatehouse. Change the codes. I told them. No one enters without my clearance. Vendors, deliveries, family. If they don't have my explicit approval, turn them away. Yes, Miss Grant, the guard said. No hesitation. That's the comfort of long relationships. You don't have to explain the weight of your words. The second call was to Nia. Hold all deliveries. Store them off-site until further notice. Done, she said, efficient as ever. Do you want me to draft a vendor memo? Yes. Simple language. Pending resolution. No access to the property until cleared by me personally. She hesitated, then added, that will ruffle feathers. Good, I replied. Let them feel what boundaries taste like. By noon, trucks had been rerouted to a warehouse 3 towns over. Chairs, floral arrangements, table linens, all the ornaments of a celebration kept at arm's length. If the groom's family drove down expecting to see a festival, all they'd meet was a locked gate and the sound of waves hitting the marsh. Standing on the porch, I felt the old boards hum beneath my feet, steady and forgiving. The house seemed to understand what I was doing. It had seen me break before. It knew I was not breaking now. This wasn't pettiness. This was preservation. Too often, women are told that love means leaving the doors wide open, letting anyone and anything trample through. But love can also mean closing the gate, changing the lock, rewriting the codes, saying, only those who honor me get to enter. The sun dropped low, turning the water copper. I leaned against the railing, tracing the horizon. Somewhere beyond that line, ships moved under Rafford's cranes, cargo stacked like puzzles. He used to tell me, every container's got a story. You just can't see it from the dock. Maybe that's what this moment was. A container, heavy, sealed, carrying pain and dignity in equal measure. I couldn't see all it held yet, but I knew it belonged to me. The beach house, the gates, the codes, none of it was about shutting my daughter out forever. It was about drawing a line in the evening light, with the house breathing quietly around me. I knew the truth. Belonging isn't claimed by blood or vows. It's proven by who you trust with your keys. Love that depends on my silence isn't love. It's rent. The restaurant was chosen with care. Neutral walls, soft lamps, white tablecloths so stiff they might as well have been starched sermons. I could feel the intention in every detail. It was the kind of place meant to stage reconciliation. Polished silver, stemmed glasses, bread baskets that arrived without asking. But peace was not on the menu. The groom's mother greeted me with her practiced embrace. One of those touches that pressed close but carried no warmth. "Lela," she said, her voice heavy with dignity. "Thank you for coming. We're just all so hurt. This wedding is about family, about legacy, about the community we've built together." She let that word community hang like incense. I knew what she meant. Donors, board seats, plaques on hospital wings. She wasn't talking about casseroles and prayer chains. She was talking about optics. The groom chimed in, his voice smooth, the way men slip into compromise when it serves their ambition. "We can move the date, maybe adjust some things," he said, eyes darting to Mary. "But the optics—" I cut him off. My voice was steady, but the steel inside it rang. "Your optics called me a fridge." The room stilled. The clink of a fork against a plate in the corner. The hum of an air conditioner suddenly magnified. Across from me, Mary's face flushed. "It was a joke," she whispered. Her hands twisted the napkin in her lap until it looked like rope. "Mama, you know how things get said." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Did you laugh because it was funny, or did you laugh because you thought that was the price of staying loved? Her eyes glistened, and for a second, I saw my daughter at 15 standing in our kitchen, fighting back tears when her science project ribbon was handed to a boy whose father was on the PDA. Back then, I told her to speak truth, even if her voice shook. Now, I watched her swallow truth to keep the peace at this table. My chest ached with something sharp and bitter. The groom reached for her hand, his thumb tracing comfort into her skin, but his eyes never left me. I recognized that calculation. I'd seen it in boardrooms when men in suits realized the nurse they'd underestimated was the one holding the clause that could stall their deal. I let the silence stretch until it nearly broke. Then I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. I didn't slide it dramatically. I set it down as though it were nothing more than a bill. "This," I said, "is a list of decisions. Gifts rescinded. Transfers frozen. Clauses invoked. Assets I will not pass to anyone who can laugh at my body like it's disposable." The groom blinked once, twice, his lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, his charm cracked. He was doing math in his head, numbers stacked against promises, the balance shifting in real time. "Mama, please," Mary whispered. Her voice broke. I turned to her, softer now, but unyielding. "I gave you life, Mary. I gave you every tool to stand on your own. But I will not fund a union that demands my silence as tribute." Across the table, his mother smiled, the kind of smile polished in mirrors, but fury leaked through her eyes, sharp and unblinking. "You'd sabotage your daughter's future over one misunderstanding?" she asked, her tone dipped in honey, but barbed underneath. I folded my napkin neatly, placed it on the table, and stood. "No," I said, "I'm saving her from mistaking humiliation for home." For a moment, nobody moved. Mary stared at her lap, her shoulders caving inward. The groom sat rigid, his fingers still tangled with hers, but his gaze locked on the envelope like it might catch fire. His mother's smile stretched thinner and thinner until it looked less like charm and more like a mask cracking at the edges. I left them there, seated in their performance. While I walked out into the humid night, my heart pounded, but my steps were sure. Some choices tear, but they tear clean. As the valet pulled my car around, I thought about how many women before me had been silenced in moments like that. How many had paid rent to keep peace in houses that cost them their dignity. I would not be one of them. They brought work to my doorstep, so we bring light to theirs. Aiden's kitchen always smelled like history. Tomatoes stewing low on the back burner. Cornbread crisping in a cast-iron skillet seasoned by 4 decades of hands. The counter was scattered with bowls of okra, diced onions, and peppers. I slipped off my shoes and leaned against the doorframe, letting the warmth of the room swallow the cold that had followed me since that restaurant meeting. "Wash your hands," she said without looking up, her knife moving through a tomato with the ease of long practice. "You look like you need feeding." Adon and I were only 18 months apart. Two girls raised in a house where every trip to the department store meant our mother being sized up before she even reached the counter. Clerks would glance at her body, at ours, and decide what kind of service we deserved. We learned early how to make space in rooms that didn't want us. That memory hung in the air, as thick as the scent of frying cornbread. I rolled up my sleeves and reached for the okra. "They've been measuring me my whole life," I said. "Now they're trying to measure my daughter, too, and she's shrinking to fit." Adon shot me a look, her eyes sharp but full of knowing. "She's grown, Lila. You can't keep her from folding herself small if she thinks that's love. All you can do is stay your size. Stay visible. Show her there's another way." The words cut, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I stirred the pot she'd set in front of me, the bubbling stew releasing steam that fogged my glasses for a moment. The hiss and crackle of food cooking was the only sound between us. Then I said it, the fear I hadn't given voice to. If I hold this line, I could lose her. Maybe not forever, but for years. What if she thinks I ruined everything? What if she doesn't forgive me? Adon set the knife down and leaned her elbows on the counter. "Better a hard line than a soft grave," she said flatly. "You bend now, they'll bury you alive in that house of theirs. And I'll be the one to bring you flowers when you can't speak anymore." My throat tightened. The kitchen light flickered against the curve of her face, shadows dancing across the familiar lines of a sister who had carried me through so many storms. I thought of nights after my first marriage ended when she slipped casseroles into my fridge so I wouldn't have to cook for Mary after 12-hour shifts. She had always been the one to remind me. Silence was not survival. We worked side by side, chopping, stirring, tasting, the rhythm of cooking binding us like prayer. When the cornbread came out of the oven, golden and steaming, Adon finally said what she'd been holding. "You should know something," she began carefully. "Someone from his people called my job, said they were checking references on you, asking about the clinic, the startup, your credentials, as if they could smear you through me." I froze, the spoon heavy in my hand. "They dragged you into this." Her mouth quirked into a humorless smile. "They think intimidation runs in every direction. But I've been a Black woman in corporate healthcare for 25 years. A phone call from some country club matron doesn't scare me. It just tells me they're desperate." Heat flooded my chest. Not just anger, but something colder, sharper. Retaliation wrapped in civility. They couldn't bully me directly, so they'd aimed for the next branch in the tree. I set the spoon down, wiped my hands, and faced her. "Then they've made a mistake. They think this is about me being difficult. But if they want to bring work to your doorstep, we'll bring light to theirs. Facts. Receipts. No slander. Just the truth they can't outrun." Adon nodded, as if she'd been waiting for me to land there. "Good, because light is harder to fight than noise." We sat down at the small wooden table, the bowls steaming between us, cornbread sliced thick and butter melting into every cut. For a moment, we were just sisters again, eating late at night, sharing food and silence. But under the quiet, my resolve hardened. If they thought humiliation could corner me, they hadn't calculated for the kind of lineage I came from. My mother taught us how to survive being sized up. Adon reminded me how to fight without lowering myself. And I had learned over and over how to rebuild from nothing but ashes. This wasn't just about one wedding. This was about refusing to let anyone measure the worth of a woman by how small. Blow for blow. Noise was their weapon. Light was mine. I sat at the wide oak desk in the study of the beach house. Paper stacked in neat piles. The leather notebook opened like a ledger of war. I didn't scribble names or slurs. I wrote tasks, steps, facts. Revenge wasn't fire. It was ink drying on paper until it became law. Baines, my lawyer, had called that morning. If they're meddling with reputations, you can respond without playing in the mud. You remember that prenuptial draft you offered to cover? The one her fiancé's mother dismissed as unromantic. Request the disclosures anyway. With Mary as the intended signatory, you're within your rights to pay for independent counsel. No strings attached. The words slid into me like a needle drawing clean blood. Proof, not rumor. Transparency, not tantrum. If Mary was going to tie herself to that man, she deserved to see the ropes in daylight. I funded the retainer for a separate attorney, one with no ties to Baines, no ties to me. The instructions were clear. Lay out the protections line by line and require disclosures of all assets, debts, obligations. Put it in writing what love would mean when translated into contracts. That was how I moved. No tantrum, no screaming scene in a restaurant, just paper and law. Later that afternoon, as I reviewed forms for the wound care startup's next expansion, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a man's voice, steady, quiet, introduced himself. Ezra, the groom's brother. I probably shouldn't be calling, he said. The hesitation thickened his throat. But I think you should see something. My stomach tightened. Say it plainly. He exhaled. Your daughter doesn't see the full picture. None of us do. But I've watched my mother the way she talks when she thinks no one's listening. I'm not brave most days, but I can forward you an email. You'll understand. Moments later, the message arrived. I clicked it open, my pulse beating in my ears. It was from the groom's mother to a committee colleague, discussing me like an agenda item. Lela is useful until she learns her place. We need her money, not her presence. Once the wedding is done, she can fade to the margins. I stared at the words, my mouth dry. Asterisk, useful. Place. Fade. Asterisk, they'd taken the language of plantation porches and lacquered it with donor smiles. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I printed the email, slid it into a plain envelope, and tucked it inside my notebook. Proof belonged in ink, not on screens that could vanish. That evening, Mary came by, tension bristling off her like static. She stood in the doorway of the study, arms crossed. Vendors keep asking questions. People think I canceled the wedding myself. Do you know what kind of pressure that puts me under? I closed the ledger, kept my voice even. I know exactly the pressure. That's why I've given you something no one else will, a clear view. I paid for a prenup attorney. Independent. No strings. Just facts on paper. If this man is your forever, he should have no fear of honesty. Her face shifted, anger flickering with something softer, maybe confusion. A prenup? That's not romantic. No, I said quietly. It's not. It's responsible. Love that can't survive disclosure isn't love. It's a performance. She looked away, chewing her lip. I slid the printed email across the desk without comment. Her hand hesitated before picking it up. She read, eyes moving line by line, until her breath hitched. When she finally looked at me, her face was pale, lips trembling. She really said this. I didn't nod. I didn't gloat. I let the silence sit heavy between us, because silence is different when it belongs to truth. She placed the paper back on the desk, hands shaking, and for the first time, I saw a crack in the wall she'd been building around herself. I didn't push her. I didn't beg. I simply said, now, you know, the rest was hers to carry. the day they were supposed to rehearse. The beach should have been marked by chairs and rows, ribbon flapping in the ocean breeze, a line of cousins practicing how not to trip on sand. Instead, the shore was bare, just tide lines and gulls. The clauses had worked exactly as intended, without the venue secured, without signed access to photography rights. The vendors scattered like startled fish. The florist sent an apologetic text, no alternate delivery on unpaid rush notice. The caterer, more blunt, we don't move kitchens on whims. Even the photographer, who had once gushed about timeless seaside candids, refused to pivot to the country club where the groom's mother tried to relocate. Without the beach, her plan was reduced to empty promises and silence. From the porch of my house, I watched black SUVs idle at the edge of the blocked road. Mothers and aunts leaned against car doors, their satin rehearsal outfits catching the sun as they argued into phones. I didn't step off my property. I didn't need to. The storm was happening without me lifting a hand. That was when I saw her. Mary. She was alone, walking slowly up the drive, the hem of her dress brushing her calves. Her shoulders slumped in a way I hadn't seen since she was 12. She paused at the gate, fingers resting on the latch. For a long moment, she just stood there, as if asking permission without words. I opened it for her. No grand embrace, no lecture, just the sound of the latch clicking open, the gate swinging back. She stepped inside, and I could feel the weight she carried pressing against the air. We didn't sit in the formal chairs or at the dining table. We walked the porch edge instead, side by side, our feet almost in rhythm with the tide beyond the dunes. The boards creaked beneath us, carrying every word that hadn't yet been spoken. I didn't know where else to go. She whispered, "You came here?" I said simply. Her hands twisted the fabric of her dress. I'd been shrinking, cutting off parts of myself just to fit. Every time his mother said something, I swallowed it. That joke about the refrigerator. I laughed because I thought if I didn't, she'd turn off the faucet. I thought if I made myself small enough, maybe I could keep the peace. Her voice cracked on peace, and it sounded more like surrender. I stopped walking, turned to her. The wind pulled at her hair, and I brushed a strand from her cheek, like I used to when she was little. "Baby," I said, my throat tightening. "And the well. No one else controls the water. Not her, not her son, not their country club dreams. You don't have to ration yourself to survive." Her eyes flooded, tears sliding fast and unguarded down her face. She covered her mouth with both hands, as if the truth was too heavy to speak aloud. "I wanted this to be beautiful," she said finally, but I didn't want to disappear inside it. I kept telling myself I could handle her, that it was just temporary. But it hasn't even started, and already I feel erased. The ocean roared behind us, a sound older than all our arguments, steady and endless. I let it fill the silence. "Then don't erase yourself," I told her. "There's still time to choose." Her breath shook, and for a moment she leaned into me like she used to when the world was too big. The rehearsal was supposed to map out her steps for tomorrow. Instead, she was here, letting me see the unedited truth. I didn't promise to fix it. I didn't threaten to fight for her. I just stood there, a presence solid enough to remind her she didn't have to shrink to be loved. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were steady, not resolved, not free, but no longer drowning. I touched her hand, squeezed once. "If you say go, I will make it easy to leave." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't let go either. The intercom buzzed just as dusk settled over Sapello Sound, the porch lamps flickering to life. Mary and I were still on the porch, our silence fragile but alive, when the sharp crackle of the speaker cut through it. "Open the gate," her future mother-in-law's voice demanded. Syrup and vinegar mixed, in equal measure. We need to clear this misunderstanding before it becomes public. I didn't move. My thumb hovered over the control, but instead of pressing, I switched the panel to record. Evidence wasn't just paper. Sometimes it was tone. Mary stiffened beside me. The groom's voice followed, lower, coaxing. Mary, babe, you're overreacting. This whole thing. My mom's just trying to help. Don't let your mother's dramatics blow this out of proportion. There it was. The word dramatic. A blade slipped between ribs, dressed as reason. Mary's breath caught. She had heard fragments before, diluted through me, softened in group texts. But here, unvarnished and amplified through the intercom, the mask slipped. I didn't respond right away. I wanted her to have the silence to register it for herself. When I did speak, my voice was steady. You're not invited past this gate. Any further demands will be documented. Do you know what this will do to your reputation? Her mother-in-law snapped. People will talk. Foundations will pull back. You'll be the woman who ruined her daughter's future because you couldn't stay in your lane. Documented, I repeated and pressed the intercom off. Mary's hand trembled on the railing. She didn't look at me. She stared at the gate as if it were both barricade and mirror. Slowly, she stepped back into the house. Her movements deliberate, like each one was a choice she was reclaiming. She turned in the doorway. I want to see the draft, she said. I didn't ask which draft. I had one prepared weeks ago, commissioned through an independent attorney when her fiancé's family called the very idea of a prenuptial agreement unromantic. I fetched the envelope from my study drawer, sealed and waiting for her, and placed it in her hands. At the kitchen table, under the soft light, she unfolded it. Her eyes moved line by line, lips tightening as she read. The clauses were simple, clear: a protection of her earnings, a safeguard of her intellectual property from the nonprofit she had built before him, a boundary clause that family holidays would rotate, not be monopolized, and most pointed, a dignity clause prohibiting derogatory remarks about physical appearance with specific remedies if violated. Her fingers paused on that line. She exhaled shakily, then pushed the draft toward him when he finally came stomping to the gate, summoned by Mary herself. For the first time, it was her voice, not mine, that set the condition. If you mean what you say about partnership, sign this. He skimmed it, jaw tightening. This is insulting. Marriage isn't supposed to be a contract. It's about love, about trust. If you need this, he tapped the paper like it was filth, then you don't really trust me. Mary didn't flinch. Trust isn't asking me to disappear. Trust is protecting each other's dignity. If you can't sign this, then what you're asking me to sign with my life is worse. His mother hissed something behind him, a whisper too low for the intercom, but sharp enough that his face twisted with it. He shoved the papers back toward her. I won't. This is a setup. My family doesn't work like this. Mary folded the papers calmly, as though filing a verdict. Her voice was softer than his, but it cut deeper. Then maybe I don't either. The porch air was still. The ocean beyond us carried on, indifferent and eternal. I watched her shoulders square, her hands steady. Some choices announced themselves with shouting and slammed doors, but others, the kind that changed everything, arrived quiet, almost tender. As she set the unsigned contract back in its envelope, I thought some doors closed without slamming. The morning of what should have been the rehearsal dinner, and then the wedding day itself arrived, without a single flower delivered, without a caterer knocking at the gate. Nia, precise as ever, released the official notice. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the ceremony has been postponed. Neutral, unemotional, the kind of phrasing that offered no handhold for gossip to climb on, though I knew they would try anyway. Calls came in from a society columnist at the Savannah Ledger, her curiosity wrapped in syrup. "Surely you'd like to correct the narrative, Mrs. Cole?" I let it ring into voicemail. Declining attention is its own kind of statement. Meanwhile, the groom's mother sharpened her knives. At church, she whispered at the edges of pews, hinting I was unstable, controlling, too proud to let my daughter live her life. At a board luncheon, she sat in pearls and said, "It's tragic when money makes a woman think she's more than she is." But I had long ago learned the power of presence. That Sunday, I walked into service wearing navy silk. No fanfare, no apology. I greeted the deacons in the hymn without wavering. Those who mattered saw the truth. Steadiness speaks louder than rumor. Behind the scenes, I made sure no one who worked for me was left dangling. The florist who had ordered hydrangeas, the jazz trio rehearsing for the reception, the caterers who had prepped half their sauces, all of them received compensation. Not extravagance, just fairness. There is no revenge in punishing laborers who only followed instructions. Meanwhile, Mary packed her belongings, not at the beach house, but at the apartment she had merely abandoned in her eagerness to build a life with him. One box at a time, she restored her space. Books back on the shelves, photographs into frames. A quilt I had sewn during her college years smoothed over her bed. It wasn't triumph. It was reclamation. Her phone buzzed in bursts. His rage spilled across the screen in short, jagged sentences. "You ruined us. You let her control you. You'll regret this." Each one harsher than the last. I watched as she read them. Thumb hovering, then drew a breath and pressed block. Her silence was not weakness. It was strength. Ezra, the one brother who had noticed the shrinking, made his quiet choice. He resigned from the foundation his mother had used as both shield and weapon. He did not grandstand. He simply sent Mary one message: "Proud of you." Sometimes the loudest loyalty is whispered. That evening, the house was hushed, except for the soft clink of cups. Mary and I sat on the porch together, steam curling from our tea. No laughter, no victory dance, just breathing. For the first time in weeks, our breaths aligned. Inhale, exhale, the rhythm of people who had endured but not been erased. She leaned against the wicker arm, her voice low. "What if I never find someone who loves me without asking me to shrink?" I set my cup down, watching the last edge of sunlight slip into the sound. "Then you don't settle for shrinking. Baby, you can marry one day, on a porch, on a beach, in a courthouse, but you will not marry away from yourself. Not with my blessing, and not with your own." She nodded, eyes bright, not with tears, but with something closer to recognition. The night settled around us. The crickets sang. For once, there was no plan scribbled in my leather notebook, no clause to invoke, no vendor to contact, just stillness, just my daughter beside me, not as a child clinging for approval, nor as a woman contorting for someone else's comfort, but as herself. And in that stillness, I almost believed the storm had passed. But the past has a way of tapping gently at closed doors, waiting for a chance to slip back in. Then the past knocked again, asking to be let out. Some endings arrive like storms, thunder and lightning and debris in their wake. But this one arrived like paperwork. Pages, signatures, clauses, written not in anger, but in clarity. That was how I knew it was final. The week after what was supposed to be her wedding, I met with Baines again. We went line by line through my living trust, revising what I had once carved out in fury. Mary's name, once stripped clean from the document, returned not as a primary, not even a sole heir, but as contingent. I attached a letter of wishes, folded and notarized. Not punishment, but promise. It read, "I choose you when you choose yourself." But I didn't stop with family. I thought about the nights I had worked back-to-back shifts as an RN, caring for patients while raising Mary with only my paycheck to stretch. I thought about the young nurses I had mentored, the ones caring for parents or children while chasing degrees. With quiet precision, I drafted the papers to establish a scholarship restricted to nursing students who were also caregivers. Its inscription, "For the ones who keep receipts." Mary, too, began her own revisions. She booked a therapy appointment, the first in her adult life. She told me over tea, cheeks flushed with something between pride and shame. "I should have done this years ago," she admitted. I told her therapy wasn't late. It was a door you open when you're ready. There was also a job lead I had kept tucked away, a fellowship in health policy connected to a colleague at the startup. I hadn't shared it before because I needed her to stand without me before I offered a hand. Now I slid the listing across the table. Her eyes lit up, not with dependency, but with choice. Within days, she submitted her application, not as someone's fiancé, but as herself. The circle widened again. My church sisters, the women who had been crossed off the guest list in the name of optics, welcomed her back with open arms. They sat her down in the fellowship hall, pressed pound cake into her hands, and prayed over her, not in pity, but in solidarity. She laughed with them, a sound I hadn't heard ring clear in months. Even the groom's family had their closing act. A thick white envelope arrived one morning bearing the letterhead of a law office downtown. The tone was polished, legalistic, a request for amicable resolution to avoid further reputational misunderstandings. I did not rage. I did not gloat. I replied with 2 pages. One, a boundary statement, formal and final. The other, an invoice for misdirected vendor costs caused by their interference, delivery redirections, cancellation fees, additional hours billed by NIA for crisis management. The total was not astronomical, but it was exact. Weeks later, the payment cleared. No apology, no note, just funds transferred, quietly like tribute. I marked the ledger line, closed the file, and never mentioned it again. Some victories live best in silence. By the time spring softened into summer, the beach house felt like itself again. The live oaks bent their shadows across the porch. Cicadas hummed in the trees, and the river tides carried secrets away with each swell. At 5 o'clock sharp one evening, I stood on the porch as the sun slipped low, spilling gold across the boards. The light hit just right, brushing the house in warmth. It felt like a benediction. My voice in that moment wasn't loud, but it was true. I didn't end a wedding. I said softly, watching the sound shimmer. I ended a habit, the habit of silence, the habit of shrinking, the habit of mistaking money for gratitude and cruelty for tradition. I thought of the words that had sparked this fire, that there was no seat for me, that my body was too large, my presence too much, and I looked around at the house rebuilt twice, once from rot, once from grief. Now it stood whole, filled with light, doors locked to harm, but open to love. People said there was no seat for me. Now the whole house sits different. This story, for me, was about reclaiming my space and showing my daughter how to reclaim hers. It wasn't easy, and it definitely tested our relationship, but sometimes setting boundaries is the deepest act of love. What about you? Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand, even with family, to protect your dignity or someone you love? Tell me what you think in the comments below.